Welcome to my second conversation with Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Today, we are really focusing in on the mental health of our children. I don't know about you, but I want to make sure that I am growing up my children holistically in the best way I can, not just making sure that they're moving their bodies and getting the right food in them, but they're also learning good mental health awareness, emotional intelligence. And I'm learning that too because I've never done this before. So I'm really excited for you to join me in my conversation today with Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Stick around. Hey there, I'm Amy Connell. Welcome to the Graced Health Podcast. I'm a certified personal trainer who wants you to know your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you were called to do. This podcast is for women who want simple and grace-filled ways to take care of themselves and enjoy a little chocolate in the process. Did you know May is Mental Health Awareness Month? I did not know that until a few weeks ago when I had to look it up because I went to a podcast conference and I ended up speaking with a lot of different therapists, and I thought, we have got to have a season on our mental health. So I looked up when Mental Health Awareness Month was, and lo and behold, it's May. So here we are in May talking about our mental health. If you did not get a chance to listen to last week's episode with Dr. Michelle Bengtson, please go back and listen to it. We talk about depression and anxiety and her personal journey through that. And she is also a neuropsychologist. I think that's a really important aspect to say together because it is proof that it can hit anyone and it knows no boundaries. As we were talking, I realized, we have a whole nother layer to peel off, and that is the mental health of our kids. So I asked her to come back this week and talk a little bit more about that. Now, if you didn't get a chance to listen, please go back and listen. But I do want you to know a little bit about Dr. Michelle. She's an international speaker and the author of the best-selling, award-winning Hope Prevails, Insights from a Doctor's Personal Journey Through Depression, and then the award-winning companion, Hope Prevails Bible Study. And then Breaking Anxiety's Grip, How to Reclaim the Peace God Promises. She's been a neuropsychologist for more than 20 years and is now in private practice where she evaluates, diagnoses, and treats children and adults with a variety of medical and mental health disorders. She knows pain and despair firsthand and combines her professional expertise and personal experience with her faith to address her patients' issues, both for those who suffer and for the ones who care for them. She and her husband of 30 years have 2 teenage sons, and she blogs on her own site, Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Bengtson.com, She spells it Bengtson. And so I will include those links because she said people misspell them all the time. Probably I have as well in my communication with her. But she and I really dig into the mental health of our kids right now. And I really kind of try and understand, where's the line? Where's the line of irritability, just being a hormonal teenager, or if it's something else? When they are isolating themselves, is that just being an introvert, or is it something deeper with their mental health? And she just provides a lot of really great guidance with that. We talk about questions to ask our kids, talking about how we can add some vocabulary to the words that we're feeling. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's taken me a long time to be able to put words with my feelings sometimes. So those are the really kind of helpful those are the really helpful things that she and I talk about. So I will not make you wait any longer. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Dr. Michelle, thank you so much for coming back. I just really, I really loved our conversation, and I cannot wait to go back and re-listen and learn. And I loved how you talked a little bit about depression and anxiety. And if you haven't, listeners, if you have not listened to that, please pause this, go back and listen to it, because one thing that we kind of started going down the path of was caring for our loved ones when they're really struggling with depression and anxiety. And I had so many questions that took that trail that I wanted to invite Dr. Michelle back on the show so we could really hone in on that specifically. I know, Dr. Michelle, my audience are a lot of moms, and a lot of them have adolescent age children, and I know that this is such almost an epidemic right now, and maybe it actually is. And so I really want to focus in on that, because one thing I know about my listeners is they are smart and they fiercely love their kids, and they'll do anything for their children to help them be healthy in all aspects of their area, including their mental health. So thank you so much for coming back on here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. As a mom of children, I think it's so important that we equip ourselves and understand what they're dealing with.
And it's really hard, and I don't know if other generations have said this as well. I mean, I feel like sometimes we feel like we're the first to deal with this stuff, probably not unlike our kids feel like we don't know what it's like for them. And maybe we don't, but I just feel like as a mom, I've got two teen boys, they're 14 and 16, and the whole social media thing is just it. I mean, how do you even deal with that? How do you deal with even little things like, the Xbox and what all of these games do. And of course, you talked a little bit in the last episode, and this is all prevalent too, right? Like, so I always want to be careful that I'm not crossing any boundaries of my kids, but pornography is a really big issue, especially with adolescent boys. And it's just, I'm like, I don't know how to parent this. I don't know how to parent this. And I know it's taking a toll on their mental health in one way or another. So I'm really glad you're here to help us kind of decipher through it and figure out ways that we can love our children even more, or in a more effective way. I'm wondering how depression and anxiety can manifest itself differently in adolescents rather than adults. Does it look different? Do they act different? Tell me a little bit more about that.
This is such an important topic for us to be discussing, and I'm so proud of you for being willing to address it on your program. When I started in private practice over 20 years ago, I rarely saw children in my private practice diagnosed with depression or anxiety unless they went through some catastrophic life event, like a parent died or like they were diagnosed with childhood leukemia. Something significant usually had to happen to trigger depression and anxiety. And now I see children weekly who struggle with both depression and anxiety. And this generation is experiencing things that you and I, Amy, as parents, never had to wrestle with as children. Because we're in the information age and they use technology so much more than we had the opportunity as children, they are also faced with more life challenges and stresses to navigate than we were. If we wanted to call somebody or find out something, we had to get on the rotary phone, and we had no privacy. We pulled the cord as far as it would go and went around the corner and thought nobody could hear us. And if we wanted news about what was going on in our nation or the world, we waited either until the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news when Walter Cronkite came on. And when he came on, we trusted he was telling the truth. Well, now our kids live in a generation where information is available at their fingertips, but cognitively and emotionally, they're not ready to deal with such bombardment of information. As adults, how we experience depression is often different than our kids will. With our kids, you will tend to see still a change in mood, and some might become more weepy. But you'll also tend to see that kids tend to display depression more with respect to irritability, anger, behavioral outbursts, or isolation. It can go either direction or both. They feel something on the inside, but they don't know what's causing it. They don't understand what they're feeling, and they don't know how to process it. So we will often see it come out in terms of their attitude and their behavior. A normal, well mannered child might all of a sudden start acting out, and it leaves a parent thinking, I've got to get my child under control. But what we really need to do is step back for a moment and assess, are there stressors going on that they're having to deal with that they don't know how to navigate? Has something happened that might be bringing up anxiety because they don't truly understand what's going on or how to process it? And we can't minimize what their experience is. Children who have, let's say, they had a great connection with their teacher, and then the teacher had to go out on medical leave. That can feel like rejection, loss, and abandonment. Yet, most of the time, our kids don't have that vocabulary to say, this is what I'm feeling. They don't even know. They just know that they're angry and upset. And anger is often a big clue that there might be some depression or anxiety going on. And if you start noticing that your children start interacting with a different peer group, or they start withdrawing more from interacting with peers, or you notice that they're not as interested in the same things that they were previously passionate about, those are all pretty good indicators that they're struggling possibly with depression or anxiety. But there's some physical signs and symptoms as well. You might not notice a significant change in mood, but you might notice that your son or daughter doesn't have much of an appetite anymore, or that they want to sleep all the time, or maybe that they're having nightmares or sleeping less. Those too can be indicators that there might be some level of depression or anxiety going on. But we always want to rule out a medical disorder first. They could have a vitamin deficiency. They could be struggling with hormones. They could have thyroid condition. So let's rule out first a medical condition that might mimic depression or anxiety. If a physical comes clean, then we have a better idea that this is an emotional issue we need to tackle.
Well, and how do you take, so assuming that there's no medical issue, at what point do you quit saying, oh, my child is just hormonal, or, oh, my child is growing and so they're sleeping all the time, or, and there are so many ways that you can almost justify some of these behavior changes that you're talking about, um, and just physical changes that they're going through. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with so many different parents. It's like, well, are they just being hormonal, or is something else wrong? Um, h- h- what kind of guidance would you give to moms in circumstances like that, where they're just kind of not even sure what to make of the uh, the nonsense of adolescence? I shouldn't say nonsense. That was really, I didn't mean that word. Not that sounds insensitive, but it's just it's crazy. Sometimes they're crazy and we don't know why.
That's why I would never look at any one or two of these signs and symptoms and assume that it's an emotional issue. But if you start seeing 4, 5, 6 of these signs and symptoms that I mentioned creep up, then you're more likely to be dealing with something other than normal teen hormones, or them spreading their wings. But look at other things like hormonal issues that are normal in adolescents don't usually cause them to change friend groups. And hormonal issues don't usually cause a change in academic performance. If you've got a child who was previously doing really well academically and their grades have really slipped, there's a reason for that. It might not be depression or anxiety, but that's often the contributor for a change in friendships, in grades, in attitude. So we're really talking about looking across the board to see how many of these changes have we been noticing. I've got a teenager. He's a normal teenager, and on spring break, he probably slept 14 hours a day. But that was spring break. If I noticed he was still doing that once he got back to school, my mom radar might go, that's interesting. But then if I noticed he stopped wanting to hang out with his friends in addition, and then his report card comes home and it slipped, I'd put all those things together and go, this is not a normal teen hormonal issue. This is something I really need to be paying attention to.
You're just saying that it's almost like, or what I'm hearing you say is that it's almost like a compounded effect because there were probably some moms out there who heard you start talking about isolation and being by themselves, and their radar went up like, well, my kid does that. My kid spends a lot of time in his or her room because that's just their personality. So what I'm hearing you say is don't be concerned over that one singular thing, but it's if the whole person is starting to have several of these identifiers, then that's the time to be a little bit more concerned.
Exactly.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So, I know too, it's funny. One of my kids has talked a lot about how a lot of his friends, and I hate to categorize, but I don't think that there's harm in it because he said a lot of my friends who are girls will say, "Oh, I'm depressed and I'm anxious," and in a way, I feel like that's because we're a little more evolved, and we have a little bit more of that language, and maybe we're not as fearful of saying it, which I want to get into here in a second. A follow up question, which is, how do we give our kids the vocabulary? So don't let me forget to say about that. But how can we talk our kids through the feelings that their friends might be having, whether or not they're clinical? They might just be using depressed as a word of I'm disappointed, I'm bummed, I'm sad, I may fill in the blank. Um, but regardless, they're feeling the way that they're feeling. And so how can we guide our children through those, not to take those burdens on, not to try and fix things, but just to either help or love or encourage or provide hope to those who are feeling that way?
One of the best things we can teach them is to ask good questions. When we ask people good questions, it gives them the opportunity to open up. And then we, in exchange, need to be good listeners. And as parents, we need to be doing this with our children, but we can also be teaching our children to do it with their peers. You're right. There is a tendency now to, I think, overuse the term depressed. But when that word comes out in their vocabulary, the next step would be to say, what do you think's causing that? What do you think's contributing to that? How long have you been feeling that way? And then pay attention whether or not this is just a momentary, I'm so depressed because I didn't get an A on that test, or I'm just depressed because so and so isn't dating so and so. They're going to give you reasons, but the word may or may not indicate truly where they're at emotionally. You're right. Sometimes they don't have the vocabulary and they don't have the experience to know sometimes the difference between I'm disappointed, I'm discouraged, I'm frustrated, or I'm depressed. Those are all four different emotions, but they can sound similar and they can often present similarly. But we can be good supporters by asking good questions and then helping to point out truth. Our kids are just as open to believing lies about themselves and about each other as we as adults are. And I didn't become able to recognize lies that I was believing until I was well into my adulthood. And
Mm-hmm.
then it was like God started taking the blinders off. I started equating my worth with what I did. And our teens and our children will sometimes get messages from peers, from teachers, from coaches, and even sometimes from us parents saying, well, if you're not perfect, you're not worthy, you're not valuable, you're not accepted. I think about how some coaches handle their athletes. And unfortunately, sometimes it can send the wrong message. And then they start believing the lie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not important. I'm not accepted. If I'm not perfect, I can't be included. And so by asking good questions and listening to their self-talk, we can get a better sense of what's underlying this. And does it truly reach the level of, ooh, this is a big deal, we need to do something about it? Or do we just need to work with them about recognizing what they're thinking and believing and give them support along the way?
Oh, that's good. That's good. I want to go back to the question that I said that I wanted to make sure I did, which was how do we give them the vocabulary? Because I think the concept of that is so powerful. And I think, I mean, for me, it's been a really long process of being able to connect words in my mental dictionary to feelings that I'm having and trust that those two are together, trust them to come out of my mouth and trust that they will land safely, which I think it was all all there at the same, from the beginning, but it can be really vulnerable to pull all those together. So how do we give our kids the language to do that without like sitting down? I mean, obviously we can't sit down and have okay, let's have a language lesson. And these are these words, and this is what this means. And when you're feeling this, this means this. And um, how can we do that so that it's effective and they can just kind of sock that away into their bank? And so that way, the next time they need to connect those dots, they can.
The younger we start with our kids, the better off they will be. But even if our listeners today are moms of teenagers, it's not too late. But one of the things that I do with people frequently, even adults, but especially with children and teens, is you can get a feelings chart. You can go to Amazon, just type in feelings chart or feelings table or how I feel today. And what it is a series of cartoon facial expressions with the feeling associated with it. And it really helps kids then to be able to differentiate between I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling lonely or I'm feeling discouraged or frustrated. It's got all the emotions on it and it helps them to identify, oh, there's a difference. And then we can trace it back to where do you think that started? When did you start feeling that way? And if they can identify, well, I started feeling that way when there wasn't one more seat at the lunch table, then we can help them navigate and problem solve what might you do differently in the future. But it's also crucial to equip our children with the appropriate scriptures to refute some of these things.
Hmm.
When our children start to feel like they're alone, that's where we can teach them. Our feelings are very compelling, but our feelings are different from truth. So we can feel alone, but God's truth says He will never leave us and never forsake us. So our
Hmm.
kids get to see, oh, so feelings are important and they tell us a lot, but they're not always trustworthy. But we can trust the truths in God's word.
Yes. Yes. And how do we one of the things that I have tried to do with my kids as they've gotten older is be empathetic to the feelings that they are having. And maybe it's validation, or maybe it's saying, I understand if you're feeling this way. Um, so how do we meet them where they are and then remind them of the God's truth if that is different than how they are feeling?
part of that comes back to always having an open door policy so that they know that whatever they're feeling, whatever they've done, whatever they've experienced, there's an open door and they can come and share it. And that you will honor their confidence and that you will honor and respect how they feel. And sometimes they don't need us to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they just need us to enfold them in a big hug. Hugs are healing. And sometimes they just need to know someone still loves them and it's okay how they're feeling. But then what I often do with my own kids is after we're done talking, or sometimes we don't even talk, I can just tell they need that hug and I'll just hold them close until they pull apart. But then I'll offer to pray with them. And in that prayer, I'll speak scripture over them that attest to the truth. And it can be something as simple as, God, I know how bad it feels when we feel alone and lonely. But I'm so glad that your word says that you will never leave us. We are never alone because you are always with us. Help my son to feel your presence and to know he's really not alone. So it's not condemning, it's
Mm-hmm.
not judging, but it is speaking truth.
Yeah.
Because as parents, our words can speak life or death, cursing or blessing over our family. And so we want to be agents of truth and blessing to them. And there's no better way to do that than to share God's truth with them, but not preach it, not preach it. It's
Right.
a very genuine, God, I'm so grateful that a lot of times we feel lonely, but your truth says we're not alone.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Um, do you have scriptures that parents could just kind of put in their back pocket, and whenever they have an opportunity to pray over their children, either with them or in their quiet time, that they could just pray those truths over their child? Do you happen to have a few that you could either give or that you could provide to me that we can put in the show notes?
Yeah, I certainly can. One of the things that I included in my book, Hope Prevails, about depression, was in the very beginning of the book. I have a letter to my depressed self. And it was written after I came out of the depression, but written back to that person who was depressed. And it's chock full of scripture, just reminding us of truths. And then on my website, as a free gift to anybody who goes to my website, I've got 40 scriptures to combat worry, fear, and anxiety. And just sharing those with our kids and speaking them over them, praying them over them is so beneficial because God tells us so often in His Word, don't be afraid, don't worry about tomorrow, be anxious for nothing. And those are so valuable truths. But when we're in that crisis moment,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we forget. You know, I'm grateful that God tells us in His Word that He is close to the brokenhearted and rescues the crushed in spirit. And for our kiddos who are struggling with depression, we can be so grateful that God will abide by His promise to be close to them and to rescue them out of that pit.
Mm. Amen. Amen. So we are recording this in late March, and I plan on airing this during May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. And it is almost unfathomable to me to think that where we stand right now in the midst of COVID-19 might be still how it is
Yeah.
6 to 8 weeks from now. I have, my children, I've got one introvert and one extrovert. The introvert is business as usual, like nothing has changed for him. And the extrovert, I'm starting to see, just some, it's affecting him. It's affecting him. So my hope is that I can edit this out and this will not be an issue in May. but I have a feeling that this is still going to be affecting us in some capacity. So, what what would you like parents to be thinking about, be kind of keeping an eye on? How can we support our children, especially the ones who are really missing that social interaction? And by God's design, they need it. They need it. Even the introverts need it. I know. How can we? How can we eat? What do we even do during this time? Because I just don't even know. Again, I don't know how to parent this.
Well, that's the interesting thing is that none of us parents know how to parent this because we've never experienced something of this magnitude. But that helps us remember our kids don't know how to navigate it either. Our kids are looking to us to see how we navigate the situation. One of the best things that we can do for our children in a time like this is to help frame their perspective. You know, I interviewed my son for my podcast, Your Hope Filled Perspective. I interviewed him about the emotions that he and his peers are experiencing and how are they navigating COVID-19.
That's so
And
funny. I'm sorry to interrupt. I've been actually thinking about doing that with my kids as well. So that's really funny that you did that. So anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go on.
but one thing that he mentioned, and it surprised me, is he said, well, you know, Mom, it's like you always say, this didn't take God by surprise, and God knows how he's going to get us through it. And Amy, in that moment, I realized he's been watching me and listening to what I say, and he remembered it. And so part of our responsibility as parents is to help frame the perspective for them to navigate this, because this will not be the last crisis they face. This may be the most significant crisis for them to date, but it will not be the last crisis. So we can use this as an opportunity for how do we manage trials and crises in our life. And one of the ways we can do that is to help shape their perspective. In our home, one of the things that we've done is really changed our perspective from I have to, like I have to stay quarantined in my house, which sounds like a burden and it sounds like all control has been taken from us. We've changed that. Instead of saying I have to, now we approach it in terms of I get to. During this COVID-19, I get to spend more one-on-one time with my family than we normally get. Some of the busyness of our life has been chopped out because we can't go to sporting events and church groups and that kind of thing. So I get this time with my kids. And what was so funny is that when we really changed that perspective, I saw my son go from a place of almost panic, like, what am I going to do if I can't see my friends, to embracing peace. And what's most interesting about that is his cell phone died 2 days before we went into quarantine. And so he was really like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because that's how they stay connected. They stay
Hmm.
connected by text and Snapchat and FaceTime. But once he realized, okay, there's a different perspective we can take here, he has been so calm and so at peace, like, you know what? It won't be like this forever. We'll get through it. So we get to shape how our kids respond to crisis. And then when they face the next crisis, they'll be better prepared.
That's great. I'm definitely going to be watching my vocabulary as I go through this and what I say and how that's going to land on their ears. You know, I had an interview with a counselor on body image, and she was talking about how it as moms, what we say about ourselves and about others is how the girls internalize it, and
Yeah.
that's really what shapes them and affects them the most. And to me, I feel like the words that are coming out of my mouth regarding being quarantined and social distancing and all of that kind of stuff, even though it's may not be about like, well, you get to do this, and it may not be about my child, but he will take that and absorb it into his own life and process that through his lens as well. So that's really, really powerful. The last question I have, and I'm sure you probably get this a lot, but we've talked a lot about recognizing signs, and sometimes it's clinical and sometimes it's not, and having a language to identify our feelings and combating that with scripture. But how do we know when it's time to take the next step and dig into resources that we have, like counselors? um, I think that's a big question that a lot of parents have, is like, when is it time to pick up the phone and make the call? Because unfortunately, I know there's still a stigma about it. I think it's getting better. I think it's getting a lot better. And that pleases me to no end. But there's this fear of, well, if my child thinks that I think that something needs to be, that's wrong with them, then that's going to just make the problem worse. And that's probably not even the right words that I need to be using in framing that question. But I'm just speaking from words that I've heard parents say, is like, I don't want them to think that there's something wrong with them, but I don't know what to do. So how do we know when it's time to just take that next step and make that call and be confident in it?
There's a couple indicators. The first one is if you notice several of these symptoms that we talked about earlier going on for more than about a month, then that's one of your indicators that we might need some outside help. But then the second thing that I really look to is if you notice that this is getting worse, not better, by all means, seek outside help. And this is no shame projected onto parents because, first of all, we're not even given a manual for how to parent when we take them home from the hospital, which I just think is really cruel. I mean, I remember coming home from the hospital and looking at the baby and going, now what am I supposed to do?
Wait,
You
what
know,
do I do next?
I was like, oh, I was looking forward to this for so long. And now that I'm here, I don't know what to do. But
Hmm.
then when our children face emotional issues, you don't have your degree in psychology. You're not a neuropsychologist. You're not expect to know these things. So give yourself grace and keep in mind that your first and foremost job when it comes to your children is to be a parent, not a therapist,
Hmm.
not even a teacher. Your first job is to parent and to love well. So there's no shame in seeking outside help. But I do understand the question that you were asking about how do we do this without communicating to our children in some shape or form that there's something wrong with them. And the way I've always suggested it to parents is that it's a little bit like when our kids work with a coach so that they improve their swing if they play baseball, or their tackle in football, or their stroke in swimming. They see a coach and they look up to that coach because that coach has more information than they do about how to help them improve. And that's really what therapy is. It's just seeking out someone else with a little bit more information about how to help you be the best version of you.
Oh,
And they tend to accept that pretty well.
I think they should change the title to mental health coach or
Yeah,
brain
yeah,
health coach.
yeah.
I love the term brain health. And the first place I read it was um, Sue Klebold, and I heard the name of her book escapes me right at the moment. But she just had such a powerful book as the parent of someone who suffered from she called it brain health problems, and she now speaks, I know, to a lot of people on depression. But brain health coach, that sounds, I like that. Dr. Michelle, I just can't thank you enough for your time, not only today, but last week too, when we just talked about depression and anxiety overall. Your wisdom and your spiritual guidance together just give such a holistic approach to our own brain health. So I would love if you could tell everybody how to get a hold of you. I know you talked a little bit about some of your books, but I don't think that we got a chance to talk about all of them. So can you just let people know how to get a hold of you, resources you have, so if they want to take this a step further, if they want to get those the download on your website for the scriptures that you wrote to yourself, can you just let everybody know how to get a hold of get a hold of you?
My website is drmichelleb.com, and on there are hundreds of blog posts and free resources and a link to my podcast, which is Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where we talk much like you and I were talking today and last week. And then they can find my books. The first is Hope Prevails, Insights from a Doctor's Personal Journey Through Depression. And then there's also the Hope Prevails Bible Study, which can be done as individuals, either with the original Hope Prevails book or separate, or it can be done in a small group. And then my most recent book is Breaking Anxiety's Grip, How to Reclaim the Peace God Promises. And they can find those on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, on my website. And I'm on all the socials, either as Dr. Michelle Bengtson or Dr. Michelle B, or on Pinterest under Hope Prevails.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm wondering, would that Bible study be appropriate for parents to do with their children?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Especially teenagers,
Okay.
because teenagers are really, we're seeing such an increased incidence of depression in our teens. And yet they're old enough and capable enough to incorporate the truths in there.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so you guys go make sure you go check out Dr. Michelle everywhere. The podcast is fantastic. It's also on YouTube. Do you put all of your episodes on YouTube?
I do.
Okay,
Yep.
so if you like to watch rather than listen or do both at the same time, that's another fantastic alternative. Thank you again so much for your time today. I just really cherish this, and I am so excited for others to hear your wisdom and your guidance and your spiritual truths over all of us. God's spiritual truths that you're reminding us of, more like that.
Happy to do it anytime, Amy. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks. Have a great one. I am so grateful for the time Dr. Michelle spent with me both this week and last week. I hope you've had an opportunity to listen to both of them. And I just really appreciate her holistic approach, not only to tackling mental health from a clinical perspective, from a physical perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective. And I hope that you were able to take some things, think about it in terms of how they relate to your family dynamics, to loved adolescents in your life, whether or not they are yours or not. You know, you might have some nieces or nephews, or you might have some younger siblings. I mean, who knows? But I think that it's really great to be able to think about how we can mold and grow our young people into emotionally and mentally healthy adults, because parenting is not easy. So tools like this make it easier. And I'm so grateful for Dr. Bengtson's time. I'm so glad you joined us today. Make sure you tune in next week as I have different conversations about our mental health and how anxiety and depression physically affect us. So make sure you come back for that next week. Hey, if you haven't gotten a chance, I would love it if you could drop a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. That's always really helpful to the show. You just type in Graced Health in the search line, click on the podcast artwork, and then scroll down to where you can find the stars to give it however many stars you like. I like 5s, but if you think it's a 3, then give it a 3. Be honest. And then you can also write a review in that space as well. So those are always really appreciated. I want to give a quick shout out to listeners in Los Angeles, California. I'm seeing a lot of you pop up on here, and that's so fun for me. Thank you so much for listening. And to everyone listening, if you hear any of these episodes that you think would be of value and serve your friends, the greatest compliment you can do is take a screenshot or just take the episode and send it to your friend. It doesn't even have to be on social media, but it means so much when you share it with your friends, because that tells me that I'm serving you well and that I'm adding value to you. So thank you so much for that. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a graced day.